21st century is a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, or simply known as the VUCA world. To be responsive and relevant, engaging to evidence-based practice is one of the adaptive ways that education leaders and teachers can do. So what is evidence-based practice? It is about making decisions through consensus, explicit, and judicious use of the best available evidence from the multiple sources to increase the likelihood of a favorable outcome. As you can see, there are three main ideas that are important to consider in this definition. First is decision making, second is best available evidence, and last is to increase favorable outcome. But before we unpack these main ideas, let us try to be familiar first with the process of EBP, which is presented by 6 A's. There are 6 essential steps involved in EBP, and these are to ask, acquire, appraise, aggregate, apply, and assess. To ask is to simply translate a practical issue or problem into an answerable question. After asking what the need is, it's important to acquire systematically and search and retrieve important evidence. To appraise is to look at the trustworthiness and the relevance of your evidence. From there, you aggregate, you try to weigh and pull together the evidence, which ones are relevant and are useful in your practice. Then you will incorporate them, apply into evidence-based decision-making process through a specific intervention. And lastly, you would have to assess your actions, evaluate the outcome of the decisions taken. To complete our definition of evidence-based practice, we can say that EBP is about making decisions by asking, acquiring, appraising, aggregating, applying, and assessing so that you could increase the likelihood of a favorable outcome. Now, let us unpack the three main ideas involved in EBP. First, let's talk about decision making. You have to remember that as education leaders and teachers, sound decision making should come from assessing your needs because it is our moral obligation and it is a skill set that need to be enhanced. In order to make sound decisions, need assessment must be facilitated so that you can address the gap. Simply put, needs assessment is looking at a discrepancy or a gap for what is and what should be. This is a systematic set of procedures that you use to determine needs so that you can set your priorities. For instance, this is your current state and this is your desired state. So that you could fill the gap, the learning gap, it's very important to look at the details of the evidence presented. This is an example of a specific needs assessment where the need is about the children migrant in terms of proficiency level in reading. Now, after getting all the data you have acquired from the needs assessment, it's important to utilize them because this will be your basis for your solutions. And this will make you allocate your resources because you have to remember that resources are scarce and this will help you improve your programs and your services or the teaching learning process in the school. Remember, needs assessment are conducted to identify the right job. In the real world, there is never enough money or resources to meet all our needs. Therefore, educators, whether you are a school head or a teacher, should be skillful in making decisions. Again, decision-making skills should be harnessed because if you only have a hammer, you would think of all problems as nails. Now, let's go to the second concept, which is about best available evidence. The question to answer is, what counts as evidence. Here, you can see that there is a fusion of evidence-based practice. First, you start with research, or commonly known as the research-informed practice. From there, you can combine it with the expert models. These are theories that you see in the literature, but more importantly, it's important to look at or to give value to your skills and experiences as a practitioner. Then after that, you can also engage into trial and error results, looking at the feedback from different stakeholders, and eventually look at the patterns you discover from all these observations, because this will yield to evidence-based practice. So what sources of evidence should be considered? As you take all these 6 steps in EBP, in summary, evidences should be considered as, number 1, the scientific research findings. It's important that you are theoretically grounded in your practice. Of course, you have to factor in your professional experience and judgment. Third, your organizational data, facts, and figures are very important to look keenly on the things happening in your context. And lastly, to look at the stakeholders' values and concerns. So finally, in looking for best available evidence, the question to ask is, why do we have to critically appraise them? Evidence is never perfect. It can be misleading. Therefore, when you critically appraise, it will give you an idea of how trustworthy it is and how relevant it is. Here are some guide questions for you to ask as you critically appraise the evidence that you have gathered. And finally, the third main idea in evidence-based practice is about increasing the favorable outcome. To increase your favorable outcome, EBP is expressed through clinical practice in education. This is a shift from the traditional to clinical approach. Let's start for the education leaders, which involve clinical supervision. Here, you can see that clinical supervision is a vehicle for developing professionals to be responsible, teachers who were capable of analyzing their own performance, who were open to change and assistance from others, and who were above all self-directing. Clinical supervision promotes collegial supervision. You can see here that vis-a-vis traditional supervision for education leaders, clinical supervision is focused on the classroom data based on the need, and it is cyclical. Here you can see the simple process of clinical supervision process. Now, for teachers, clinical teaching also have steps and questions that will guide you in your evidence-based practice. This is the clinical teaching cycle of Professor Griffin from Melbourne University. You start with asking yourself, what is the student ready to learn and what evidence supports this? From there, you will have to ask yourself, what are the possible evidence-based interventions? Then, you ask, what is the preferred intervention and how will it be resourced and implemented? Then you ask, what is the expected impact on learning and how will this be evaluated? Finally, you ask yourself, what happened and how can this be interpreted? Then you go back to the next step of the cycle. So, taking the fusion of clinical teaching cycle, you can see that this is a clear manifestation of evidence-based practice. We have just discussed the 3 main ideas in evidence-based practice: how to make decisions, about the best available evidence, and to increase a favorable outcome. To end this presentation, we ask ourselves, why do we need evidence-based practice? Let me emphasize in 4 important points. Number 1, it is very important to critically evaluate all the available data in education. Data should not be shelved. They are very important to inform our practice. Second, it is important to distinguish between popular ideas and those that work in your context. Sometimes we hear and we observe other ideas from other schools or other practice, but it is important to consider how they are relevant in your context. Thirdly, you have to remember that EVP improves quality of decisions that we make in the education sector. And finally, there is a need to recognize that evidence-based practice can inform transformative actions for our school systems.
What is that? Developmentally appropriate practice promotes each child's optimal development and learning through a strength-based, play-based approach to joyful, engaged learning. That is effective at fostering the development of self-regulation, language, and social skills. To promote individuality in the classroom, a teacher may use the strength-based approach that provides opportunities for children to share their thoughts in small groups or, for example, through their artwork by actively listening to them when they decide to share. The child should be given a platform to share their individuality by dancing, playing music, or engaging in other activities to keep the children engaged. You can ask parents about their child's activities and accomplishments so that both parties can identify the unique talents the child possesses. It is important to remember that every child grows at their own pace. What do you see in a DAP classroom? In such a classroom, you should expect teachers encourage child talk by providing prompts to help children express themselves. The use of open-ended questions that can have multiple answers to help learners expand their own utterances. Interactive experiences with language and print through nursery rhymes with an emphasis on code-based instruction, helping the children to understand the relationship between the spoken language and print. Interactive storybook telling and incorporate the children's home language in the classroom using songs and videos. DAP's individuality creates spaces for children to grow, learn, interact, play, and develop in educationally and culturally rich setting. DAP classrooms form strong, caring relationship with children that enhance their self-esteem. Ito ang galaw edukampiyon ko. Ano ang sayo? What teachers can do to foster motivation in the second language classroom? There are 5 areas that teachers can work on to increase the students' interest. The 5 T's of motivation, one of which is the text. A text is a classroom material used in motivating learners to study and learn the target language. By using interesting and relevant texts in our classroom, we can make our students eager and motivated to learn English. How do we know what texts are interesting, appropriate, and relevant to our learners? We can do this by doing this what we call needs assessment. Needs assessment is a means for us teachers to identify, understand, and address the needs and interests of learners. It helps us examine the gap and the factors that impacts this gap. In our lessons, needs assessment can be used to identify the text that students need to produce and find interesting. With this, we can make informed and research-based decisions on the contents of our lessons. For instance, among intermediate level learners, you can utilize the profiling of students, reading test results, and the communicative style of learners in identifying the interest and level of text materials to be used. For grades 4 to 6 learners, Some age-appropriate and interesting texts are narrative texts like adventure, fairy tales, dialogues, play scripts, and traditional tales. By exposing students to and teaching them how to produce narrative texts, they will be able to organize and explore new ideas, compose stories, and express themselves creatively and imaginatively in ways they find motivating and interesting. This shows that assessing the needs and interests of students plays vital role in our teaching practices to produce better learning outcomes of students. Ito ang Galaw Edukampiyon ko. Ano ang sayo?
One of the common misconceptions about evidence-based practice is that it only focuses on numbers and hard data, and that it disregards the personal experiences of teachers. In reality though, evidence-based practice encourages us to reflect critically on our experiences so that we can determine which of our strategies work and which ones don't. An easy way to reflect on our teaching practice is through the use of teaching journals. Every time we implement a new lesson or target a new skill or introduce a new literary text, it may be useful for us to record how our students responded to this new material. Some questions that we can use to reflect are: how much time did the new strategy require? What macro skills did the new technique target? Did the students readily engage with the lesson? Is there value in reusing this same strategy in the future? And how can it be improved? Articulating our thoughts on our own classroom experiences will give us reliable information that we can use to make informed decisions. And while we reflect on our practices, we may also find ourselves thinking about our profession in general. To better articulate our experiences as English teachers, we sometimes come up with imagery that describe how we feel about our work. Some of us might say that teaching English is like pushing a boulder up a hill, while some may say that it's akin to shining a light onto a dark room. It's useful to ascribe metaphors to our teaching because these will help us reflect on our attitude. By writing these metaphors down, we can come back to our notes in the future and see if we still agree with the descriptions that our younger selves gave. Another great feature of having tangible notes is that we can easily share our thoughts and insights with our co-teachers so that we can benefit from each other's reflections. Evidence-based practice does not need to be complicated. Even simple notes can give us ample information that we can use to make informed decisions. Keeping a teaching journal allows us to articulate our experiences, thoughts, and feelings about our practices, and these notes can assist us to make informed decisions in the future. Ito ang Galawang Edukampiyon ko. Ano ang sayo? Evidence-based practice urges teachers to objectively evaluate our teaching methods. We have to be aware of relevant research so that we know which approaches work and which ones do not. Let's apply this principle in one of the major areas that we have to address as language teachers: vocabulary building. A go-to vocabulary building for many high school English teachers is inferring meaning of words through context clues. Many teachers believe that students can become resourceful and observant when they're asked to draw meaning just from limited textual evidence. However, current research tells us that students can only effectively infer meaning through context clues if they already know at least 98% of the words in the text. If a student does not have a solid vocabulary foundation, they will not be able to fully utilize this skill. So if our students will find using context clues difficult because they know few words, what can language teachers use instead? Researchers suggest teaching language in meaningful chunks. Students acquire useful phrases and expressions as a whole, and once they're more comfortable with the language, they can then break down these formulaic phrases into individual words. How does this affect our classroom practices? For one, instead of having a word of the day for every English session, we can instead have a phrase of the day or expression of the day so that our students will be exposed to language that is useful for daily communication. Maybe teachers do not even have to introduce new phrases every day, since research shows that learners need time to process phrases into individual words. It might be better for us to aim for fluency by thoroughly teaching fewer phrases instead of just carelessly dumping many words. Vocabulary building is just one area of language teaching that we can apply evidence-based practices on. And as we discover more things about language teaching and learning, let us be willing to objectively evaluate our strategies so that we can give the best language education to our students. Ito ang galawang edukampiyon ko. Ano ang sayo?
The new normal has brought numerous challenges in language teaching and learning. Some concerns are focused on the learning gap that is yet to be fully analyzed and understood. As we go back to in-person classes, one opportunity that we can take advantage of is the use of research-based language learning approaches apt for the current needs of our learners. One of the proven approaches to improving not only the production of language in the classroom, but also overall learner engagement, task-based instruction or TBI. TBI serves as an avenue to ensure that learners learn by doing. Central to TBI are language tasks. Tasks are rich in language and will involve the use of macro skills listening, speaking, reading, writing, viewing, and visual representing. Tasks focus on the use of authentic language and may come in different forms. We can use information gap, jigsaw, decision-making, and opinion-sharing activities. This can be accomplished individually, by pairs, or by groups. For senior high school students, authentic tasks can be incorporated in their curriculum. They can work on this while they are enrolled in their immersion programs, where the external partner can provide technical assistance in the completion of these tasks. Some sample tasks that our senior high school students can work on are a business proposal, feasibility study for ABM students, and a newsletter on current cultural activities in the community for HUMSS students. Aside from allowing students to use language in communicative situations, we can also use the performance of students in these tasks to inform our instructional decisions. For example, areas of difficulty that we observe among students when they do a task can provide us with information on topics that we might need to teach or reteach. Difficult grammar points during the task can be discussed and practiced further in class. Tasks can also be employed to identify the strengths of students, which can help us better budget our instructional time. Task-based instruction offers a lot of benefits for students and teachers alike. By using tasks in our classrooms, not only allow our students to use English in meaningful ways, but also provide ourselves with evidence that can inform our practice. Ito ang galaw edukampiyon ko. Ano ang sayo?
I am Audrey B. Moralio, an assistant professor at the UP College of Education. The series of videos on the application of research-based practices demonstrates the various options that English teachers have at their disposal to ensure that their instruction is based on data and evidence. In Teacher Kate's first video on developmentally appropriate practice, she focuses on fostering individuality among key Stage 1 pupils through research-based guidelines and practices. One specific activity that she suggests is allowing pupils, even at such a young age, to show their individuality by articulating their thoughts and listening to each other's perspectives. They can also be made to dance and play music in class. One accessible way for teachers to use research-based practice is by gathering information from parents on their children's activities and accomplishments. Teachers can then use this information to ensure that student individuality is promoted through classroom activities. Finally, Teacher Kate provides some other features that one might expect of a developmentally appropriate class focused on fostering student individuality. In her second video, Teacher Kate talks about using needs assessment to identify interesting and motivating texts for key Stage 2 students. Needs assessment is a powerful tool for teachers to make their teaching research-based. Through needs assessment, they can identify student needs and preferences, interpret this information, and use this information to make classroom decisions. In her video, she recommends using needs assessment to identify different written and oral texts that students find interesting and are expected to produce in school and different communicative situations. Needs assessment can also be employed by teachers to ensure that the texts that they use are appropriate for their students. By using needs assessment to identify appropriate and interesting texts, teachers can further motivate their students in their language learning. Another way to exercise evidence-based practice in teaching is by engaging in reflective practice and using research to critically examine the effectiveness of current strategies. In his first video, Teacher Jess emphasizes that evidence-based practice can be done through critical reflection on teaching practices that then can be used to take informed decisions. He recommends the use of teaching journals, where answers to some reflection questions can be written and recorded. By putting reflections into writing, teachers can track their professional development and learn from each other through an exchange of notes. In his second video, Teacher Jess demonstrates the need for teachers to use research to critically evaluate current practices. To demonstrate his point, Teacher Jess uses context clues in identifying the meanings of words as his example. He says that the use of context clues is a go-to vocabulary lesson among high school English teachers. However, research shows that context clues become useful only if students already know most of the words in the text, indicating that students with limited vocabulary will not fully benefit from using context clues to understand the meanings of difficult words. He cites research to propose a better way to help students in their vocabulary acquisition, and this better way is by teaching them meaningful chunks and formulaic phrases. He further advocates allowing students to master few meaningful chunks to develop fluency, instead of giving them lots of formulaic phrases in a given period. In the final video for this series, Teacher Mitch advocates the use of task-based instruction, or TBI, to offer students opportunities for meaningful language use and to give teachers a good means to gauge student proficiency. In her discussion, she highlights the skills that can be targeted by TBI and the different TBI activities that can be employed by English teachers. At the senior high school level, she suggests tasks such as feasibility studies for ABM students and a newsletter on current cultural activities in the community for young students. In these tasks, students can seek technical assistance from their immersion supervisors if needed. Aside from benefits for students, TBI gives teachers critical information that can help them plan their lessons. Areas of difficulty during task work can help teachers adjust subsequent lessons. Strengths demonstrated by students, meanwhile, can help teachers better budget their instructional time. These videos have offered teachers concrete applications of research-based practice in their classrooms. There are many more ways to do it, and we barely scratch the surface with these suggestions. It is hoped that after viewing these videos, teachers will start to be more conscientious in their decision-making and will rely on evidence and data to increase the likelihood of a positive outcome. Ito ang galawang edukampiyon ko. Ano ang sayo?